Andrew, would you like to come up, please?
Speak slowly.
All right, before I begin, I'd like to take a moment for some acknowledgments. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the museum for having me here today for this amazing event, and to Jeremy, Lauren, Kim, and Chris for dealing with my constant emails, even though they have very busy schedules. I'd also like to thank, of course, my dear family and friends who were able to join me here today, and those that couldn't. Without their love and support, it's hard to think that I would have completed this book and be standing up here to tell my grandfather's story today. Finally, I would like to take a minute to personally show my appreciation for the many veterans that are here with us today, with a special shout out for my grandfather, Rich Gabriel, who served the United States in the Korean War and who was more than willing to join us in beautiful New Orleans for this occasion. It is because of your service and sacrifices for this country that we are here today at this museum in remembrance and celebration. So thank you. Now, I could start off by throwing a list of details at you about Sergeant Frank Carolla, but I thought it best instead to use the words of Rose Castucci, Frank's sister, who wrote the foreword of my book. We were a family of 9 children. My brother Frank was the second child, the second son. He was the twin of a sister that did not survive. He would always say to me, "You look at me and I know you're my twin." I would always answer him, "Yes, I know." This was a connection we shared throughout our lives, both before the war and after he returned home a changed person. Frank was extremely intelligent. He loved to write poetry and was always drawing. I can remember my brother playing records in our living room and dancing. He loved to dance and was very good. He had a happy life, and that's how I try to remember my brother, despite the lifelong scars that he had suffered with from his time in the war. Scars that came back to haunt him in his last years while he fought a losing battle with Alzheimer's disease. In my heart and in my eyes, when I see that flag fly, I think of my brother with a proud fondness. When he died and was buried as a veteran in a veteran's cemetery, and they played those taps and they folded that flag, I cried. I cried because I knew my brother had given his life for every inch of that flag. His diary is a testament to that, every word written in a hand that suffered so much for this country. I think Rose's words sum up Frank's early life and the changed person that he returned home as quite nicely. Frank's time as a prisoner of war indeed left him scarred, both physically and emotionally, scarred by the dark, torturous memories of his time in Stalag 17B in Krems, Austria. You see, in the simplest of terms, and as many veterans can unfortunately attest to, he returned home to carry on his life with post-traumatic stress disorder. But life doesn't stop for debilitating depression. The years marched on, and life had to continue for Frank and so many others. My grandfather and his lifelong sweetheart, Dominica, adopted a baby girl in the years following the war. My mother, Marianne, was also with us today. As time passed, she married my father, Raymond, and together they would have 4 children, me and my sisters, Giselle, Raina, and Anna. As kids growing up in the 80s and 90s, our grandfather's time in World War II was the farthest thing from our minds, for my 2 older sisters and I. To us, the war was ancient history. What did it even matter anymore? What mattered was going outside to play, and when our pop-up would come and take us out for one treat or another. And some days, I suspect, the war seemed to be the farthest thing from Frank's mind, too. But inevitably, that foreboding shadow would creep in from his memories, and the depression would take hold. But what was depression to a child? All we knew was that some days, the happy, loving pop-up that we knew became an entirely different person. Consumed by the memories of watching comrades in arms, killed in the flaming wreckage of plane crashes, or starving to death in some distant camp. I distinctly remember one time during one of his many sleepovers, coming down into the kitchen for a drink in the middle of the night. While he slept in the living room, I can recall hearing him talking in his sleep, saying things like, "Get out of the plane is on fire, we're going down." Crazy old man, I thought. Again, a child with a child's cares and ignorance. My mom would lovingly tell us that Pop was having one of his mood swings, and that when the depression would set in, he was in a bad mood. Sometimes these bad moods would last as little as a weekend, while at other times they would be all-consuming. At one time to the point where he even needed to be hospitalized. But what did that matter to me, though? I was just a selfish kid who was waiting for the next good mood to hit so that I can convince my pop to take me to the comic book store, even when my parents wouldn't allow it. I just wanted my pop, the man who bought me my first Indiana Jones movies back when he was in a good mood. And that's how it was for many years, never giving a second thought to the experiences that caused these mood swings. Now, in his diary, the Red Cross Journal, where he depicted his time leading up to and encompassing his time in Stalag 17B, parts of which are now on display within the museum. He had passed them on to my mother, and they were kept safe in our house for many, many years. Every once in a while, my pop, in one of his good moods, would pull the diary out and allow us kids to explore his time in the Stalag from late 1943 to May of 1945. Sometimes it was interesting, especially when he found the courage to relive those memories and explain what was written on each page. Most of the time, however, it was boring for us, our young minds never taking in the enormity of what he had experienced. Unfortunately, it wasn't until much later, towards the end of Frank's life, that I had the maturity to really sit down and give his time in the war much thought. I can remember opening that old, worn, felt-covered book for the first time and truly taking in and actively comprehending every page and detail. For the first time, I was seeing my grandfather from a whole new light. Page after page, from his funny photos and stories of his time in basic training, to the horrifically detailed accounts of his bomber, which he called in the diary the Flag Dodger, being shot down in the night skies over the border of Austria and Italy, illuminated only by anti-aircraft fire as he parachuted down. I've included a poem about this experience entitled The Last Flight, written by Frank and included in my book. Big birds filled with eggs of death darken the skies of day, and the enemy guns blow them breath to take their breath away. Chicks nestled beneath her wings, each with a job to do, showing a courage known to kings as their guns spit a mad tattoo. Then through the din of the great bird's flight, a shot found her heart and slowed her down in her gallant flight as she fought to do more than her part. Then she cautioned her chicks to be ready, for her light was ebbing fast. Her course was unstudied, and then she breathed her last. Each chick leaped from the great bird's wing and held high with trembling hands that wonderful man-made silken thing that carried them safe to land. Now each chick had just one thought in mind: their time had not come to die. But they thought of the land they left behind and uttered a new kind of sigh. This poem painted a picture of the devastating crash in Frank's own words. And to have actually experienced it must have been unbelievable. I then went on to hold actual Western Union telegrams in my hand that had been sent to Frank's mother, telling his family that he was first missing in action, then actually presumed dead before being confirmed as a POW. It made me realize the heartbreak that must have went through their hearts and minds. Reading the accounts of a bombing raid over the camp while he was in an infirmary, written on tattered scraps of toilet paper. He had actually written on scraps of toilet paper. That was the only thing available to him. Looking over the menu he drew of the meals in the camp made me ask myself if I could handle having merely bowls of hot water for dinner, or leaving the maggots in the bowl of barley you had been given for breakfast, just to give yourself some extra protein. Finding myself nearly in tears by some stories, but then laughing out loud at the whimsical drawings and poems that he included, undoubtedly in an attempt to keep his mind and humor alive in this sinister place. I had found an aspect of my pop that I had never knew existed. I wanted to hear it from his mouth again, this time to listen and understand with intent. But by this time, life had thrown Frank another twist. He had suffered a fall, the shock of which had ushered in the mind-destroying disease of Alzheimer's. Seeing that his experiences would be lost to those of future generations, like my littlest sister Anna, who was only 5 when Frank passed in 2005, I decided to compile his diary into a book. I went to his sister Rose. I went to my uncles, my father's brothers, who he had told many stories to in the past, to recount the stories he had told them. I wanted to preserve this time in history the best I could, understanding only full well that I would never have the chance to fix the unawareness of my youth and listen intently while he spoke about this time from his lips again. Within a few months, my wife Liz and I will welcome our first child into the world. And when the time comes that he or she, or my nieces and nephews ask, what was my great-grandfather like? I will tell them about his sacrifices as a soldier for our nation in World War II. I will tell them about his time as a POW overseas. I will show them the diary where he chronicled his hopes and struggles while in this darkest of places. Even more than that, though, I hope to impart this understanding to them, an understanding that I did not appreciate until far too late. I will tell them of a man who tried his best, despite having depression from a time in a prisoner of war camp, who did his best to bring happiness and joy to all those around him. A man with a joke always at the ready and an endearing laugh to compliment it with. A sharp-dressed gentleman who can sing and dance like a pro and regale you with stories of years gone by for hours on end. A man who you absolutely hated to go to a shopping mall with because he loved to talk to nearly everyone he passed by. A feisty son of a gun who never hesitated to rile up one of his oldest friends, Bob Howe, at the bi-weekly poker game that has been going on for the last 5 decades and still continues to this day. The type of man that would give his right arm and then some for his family, especially his grandchildren. A man whose love, care, and guidance will live on in so many hearts for many, many years to come. A son, a brother, a friend, an uncle, and a papa. Thank you.